Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the Fifth Estate. I'm Sally Warhaft, and, well, tonight we are discussing the role and the culture of trade unions in Australia in the 21st century, the state of the union. Sadly, I'm sure you've all noticed, one of our guests is not here tonight. Alan Bolton from the Fair Work Commission is really quite sick. He was unable to travel. He's going to be fine. It's a lurgy he brought back from somewhere, but he was absolutely not able to be here. He sends his apologies, and I'm sure we'll have some cause to get him here at a later date. So our apologies for that as well. And it was a bit, it was just too late in the day for us to search for a replacement, and in fact we decided we just didn't need one because we're very lucky to have with us two esteemed guests. Associate Professor John Howe is the Deputy Dean of the Melbourne Law School and co-director of the Centre for Employment and Labour Relations Law there. He's the co-author of a recent report on the historical and current role of trade unions in Australia, and he was the Secretary of the Australian Labour Law Association between 2005 and 2009. Lisa Fitzpatrick is the State Secretary of the Victorian branch of the Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation. Do you still call it that, Lisa?
We just changed that to that on the 25th of July.
It was. I was a bit confused. So it's this.
We've added midwives.
You've added midwives. Yes. Well, hurrah to the midwives.
Yes.
And she was elected in that role in late 2001. So it is her 13th year in the job. Lisa is also a registered nurse. Please give them a warm Wheeler welcome. There is so much going on, of course, with unions at the moment. There is of course, the very obvious rotten to the core saga surrounding Craig Thompson. There's the recently announced Royal Commission into unions, but also, and perhaps even more importantly for tonight, what I want to get into is the culture and the future of unions. And for somebody like me, I've never been a member of a union. I've done so many different jobs in my working life, unless I was put in one without my knowledge, which John tells me is likely. It's certainly possible at some stage.
In the old days.
Yeah, in the old days. So it's something that for me, and I'm sure for many other people as well, wanting to understand how the union movement went from, its glory days through different challenges over time, different moments of incredible importance. The one that stands out to me in recent memory is just 7 years ago, during the lead up to the election of Kevin Rudd. Of course, there was the incredible campaign by the trade union movement about work choices. And when I reflect back on that time, it's almost as if the unions were as powerful as the mining lobby today. They really did mobilise, and yet today the membership is in free fall, and we want to find out, well, not for your union, Lisa, but we'll get to that. We want to find out where that culture is and what the future is. So I'm going to start with a broad but different question for each of you. John, I'll start with you. Is there still a place for unions in contemporary Australia?
Oh, look, absolutely, I think. The recent study that we've completed is actually about the union role in monitoring and enforcement of employment conditions. So, and our study found that unions continue to play an important role in monitoring compliance with our legal standards, particularly for vulnerable workers, and where necessary enforcing those standards against non-complying employers. And that's just one example, I think, of where unions to continue to play an important role.
Important, but is it essential, do you think?
Oh, absolutely, because there are many workers. Well, for a start, I think unions play an important role in setting the standards. So they're part of the process in establishing those standards. But if the standards aren't observed, what are they worth? And there are many workers who are not in a position to complain when they're not getting the benefit of those standards. And unions play an important role in raising awareness about the importance and the existence, but also the importance of employment rights. But also as an organisation that's membership driven, that's on the ground, that can find non-compliance and do something about it, where we do certainly have a government regulator now that's responsible for enforcing standards, but they can't cover everyone, and they're not as on the ground and aware of what's going on in industries as unions are. So,
Lisa, give us your take on the culture of unions and the credibility of unions, not your union specifically, but Australia-wide at the moment.
I think to start to answer that, you have to differentiate between the culture of unions that exists within their own union membership, as well as the culture of unions that is promulgated by tabloid media. And I can speak obviously about our union, but I know union members of other unions. I have, for example, a nephew who's a member of the ETU and is very proud of the work and the benefits and the representation and what that union does for him. So I think there is this disconnect between what union members think of their own union that they're membership of, as opposed to some aspects of the media and the way they try to paint all of the union movement in just the one umbrella, rather than looking at the wonderful work that is achieved by unions, irrespective or despite some of the issues that we've had to deal with in relation to union officials of one or two unions.
Your union has not had a mention, I think, in the press over the last few months, which I'm sure you're thrilled about.
No, we have been in. I'm not thrilled that you haven't read it.
Oh, okay. No, not for the bad
not
stuff.
For an enterprise agreement. No, I'm very pleased that that's
not for the tabloid reporting, but. One of the things that was interesting to me in reading about this is that your union is also increased its membership. I think it's more than doubled it in the time you've been there. Now, that is way against the trend. The only thing I could see that explained that, that teachers and nursing unions seem to be doing better than many of the others. The two things I could see that they perhaps had in common was a large female membership, but they're also occupations that are university educated. And this is against the stereotype, I suppose, of the union movement over time in Australia. Can you talk to that?
Well, yes, the bulk of our membership is university or university level educated. We have a large proportion of members who are
I'm not suggesting
sector.
That's why they don't get into trouble, by the way. It was just a demographic shift that I thought was interesting.
I think also we've been in the fortunate situation where we've had a sector that's grown in employment numbers, so that's been obviously a contributing factor for us. We also have a very strong public sector where we have a capacity to have a very strong presence in a workplace that has got 3,000 potential members in the one place. So I think apart from the things that we do other than representation and the industrial arm of our union, and I think that's an important point that we'll no doubt touch on over the next little while. But for us, recruitment's a really significant is a very significant focus of everybody that works in our organisation, all 132, so we're very recruitment focused. We have a great network of members who are our job representatives and shop stewards, so we're working towards that same goal. So there's a strong culture of recruitment and encouraging people to be in. But we are benefited predominantly, I think, in a large capacity to have very large workplaces with a growing workforce over a number of years.
And women, is that an important part of the strength of your union, that it's still it's again a large demographic, it's 50% of the working population, and yet not 50% of wages and conditions?
Yes, no, I wouldn't see that the gender card is one that assists us in recruiting. We try not to play that. So I'm not.
Well, you probably don't have to.
No, that's right. We don't. With 90, there is 89% of the nursing and midwifery workforce is female. But I haven't considered the gender as an issue that makes it easier for us to recruit, or the fact that we are so strong because we are female dominated.
John, your research, the demographics and tell us what you know about where recruitment or membership is working and where it isn't, and why that might be so. The unions that are seeing sort of free fall, I suppose.
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about that is, as Lisa suggests, it can often be reflective of job trends in a sector, and I think that's why the issues about the subsidies to manufacturing and the announcements by Ford and Holden that they're leaving are so significant, because your union's ability to organise and recruit membership is kind of dependent on there being jobs, people to recruit. So that's certainly an area where there's challenges. And I guess industries where there's some stability and ongoing funding, like health. I mean, we might argue about how much funding health receives, and education, but nevertheless, they are funded. There is some stability and some ongoing stability and sustainability in those industries, and there isn't necessarily in, it seems, given some government policy decisions in others, and that's, I think, some of the areas where unions face challenges.
The study that has the press release went out today for your
good
study
timing.
of that was brilliant timing, and you talk about that unions have actually adapted their approaches and their strategies to different times, to a completely different workplace culture than 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. How? What have they done? Because I don't see it as somebody that reads the news and consumes the information, I suppose, that way, not on the inside of it. How have they done that?
Well, look, historically, unions were, in the Australian system, were incorporated within that system. So unions played a very important role in making awards and setting standards, and until 20 or 30 years ago were able to include what are called union security clauses in awards and so on, which essentially encouraged union membership. And the legal system, and I'm a labour lawyer, so I tend to think about the relationship between unions and the legal system, was very supportive of trade unions and trade union membership. It's been a much more difficult environment over the last 20 to 30 years, not just because of the legal system, but a significant change has been there's been less supports for unions in the system, and the unions have had to look to how they, work to recruit members and to retain membership. And there have been different strategies, and I'm sure Lisa can tell us a bit about that. But two key ones have been whether you follow an organising model which focuses resources on recruitment of members and involvement of members in the union through organising, or whether you follow more of a service model, so you promote the things that unions can do in return for membership and for members' investment of funds in membership of the union. So there have been debates around those. those two different strategies and which is better for attracting and retaining members. Our report focuses on this enforcement function, so we argue that it's always been, for unions as really a joint regulator in our system to monitor and enforce the labour standards that unions have been involved in setting. And perhaps unions haven't promoted or made the most of that enforcement function, and maybe that's something they can do to promote unions and to attract a membership. But I guess that's more of that service model that not all unions subscribe to, and not all unions agree is an effective way of attracting and retaining members.
Tell us a bit about it, Lisa, about the strategies. And
for our strategy, it's not adopting one model over the other, it's about adopting the best out of both worlds. So we obviously we see part of our role as educating our membership so that they're actually self-sufficient and can argue and stand up for themselves with our support, and that they can then liaise with us, and they do really take on a significant role at the workplace. But what we've done is we've had to diversify our membership package. Our membership, depending on how many hours you work or what level nurse you are, is between $300 and $500 a year. So my view is that that's a lot of money.
It is a lot of money.
And people have to, when you get that school bill at the start of the year, or when you get that $700 electricity bill, and if you're paying your membership to us and it's a $500 bill, I would put, a lot of people will put the union bill at the bottom of the pile and it might never get paid. So we've tried to be smart about how our membership pays so that it's smaller amounts and not so onerous. But we also have offered, we want to make sure that that package is seen as being beneficial. So we have, for example, indemnity insurance, which is a requirement for nurses and midwives. Now, we're not the only union that has that. Other unions have got insurance, very good insurance, health insurance sort of stuff for their members. We're an RTO as well, a registered training organisation. So we invest a significant amount of our membership fees in developing that. So we now have online learning, face-to-face learning, as well as offering accredited courses that are relevant to our members but also students, so that we're helping grow our workforce as well. We have our information service, we've got representation with our lawyers that we retain, free wills, all of these sorts of benefits. We couldn't just rely on negotiating enterprise agreements as the only recruitment factor. That would only happen once every 3 or 4 years in the public sector, albeit that we're negotiating enterprise agreements every week in different workplaces. Unions have achieved greater outcomes in negotiated enterprise agreements as far as wages and conditions than non-union enterprise agreements. So we have got success there, and we're proud of that success. But, making sure that we defend what we've achieved. We're still trying to get some staffing numbers that we achieved in March 2012, funded by the state government and put in at hospitals. And if we don't make sure that happens, then, we've taken all that effort, but we're one step back. So the compliance and the defending what you have is absolutely critical and an important role. But you can't just manage on the industrial arm alone. We've got, we initiated in Victoria a nursing and midwifery health program, so that for that small percentage of nurses who do require assistance through drug or alcohol or stress-related illnesses, that there's support there for them. So it has to be a package that somebody can look at it and think, well, I'm never going to be disciplined by my employer because I'm a model employee, so I don't need the union for that, but I do need those other things. They are beneficial, and I see value in spending the household money in making sure that I have it. So I think unions are doing that very well. Many unions have got a registered training arm because they see that that's absolutely critical for their membership. Not everybody's going to get into university to upgrade their skills. That's not where they want to be, but if you've got your union that you can turn to upgrade, I think that's really critical.
John, obviously there's been a Royal Commission called into union corruption, which I'm quite sure, Lisa, you're not very happy about. It's going to take quite a bit of time, and money, I assume, and resources. How, John, are the unions likely to respond to this? How should they respond in front of a legal framework with wide powers? I think it's going to be announced that a police task force to accompany it as well. I mean, what should they be doing, and what are they likely to do?
Well, if it's just as a general observation, if it's anything like previous royal commissions into unions, there's going to be a money pit for a lawyer's picnic, and then I guess the question for unions, the unions that are going to be dragged into this royal commission, is the extent to which they participate, or try not to, I guess, participate. And then I guess there's a question for the broader Labor movement as to how it kind of deals with the fact that the Royal Commission's going on. But look, I would have thought the message is that, there's always going to be a bit of corruption in any industry, and a union can't. It'd be very difficult for larger unions to make sure that every person involved is, pure and clean. And that, I think the message will probably be this, we're largely just trying to do the best for our members, that this is a witch hunt designed to, swallow up union resources, which could be much better spent on members and on workers more generally. And just, I guess, trying to, put before the Commission exactly, all of the regular activities of the union and the accountability mechanisms that those unions have in place to prevent the kind of, Craig Thompson type situation occurring, or prevent the sort of, I guess, abuse of the system that's been reported in the media. I mean, I think it's important to remember that there was a Royal Commission into the building industry only 10 years ago that actually found very little evidence of corruption after a lot of money was spent enthusiastically trying to find it. So to me, this is not a useful way of spending taxpayers' money if there are concerns about corruption in the building industry. Perhaps, there is an issue around enforcement of criminal law, and that's something for the police to take up rather than for there to be a Royal Commission which drags all the industrial players into it.
I was reading the results of a quite recent and large survey of, people's opinions to professions, and a recent one, and unionists were right down there with politicians and the media. And of course, it's like the Bermuda Triangle, except that none of them ever disappear, and that it's a very linked relationship, isn't it? Except that depending on the government of the day and the feeling of the day, there's obviously hostility there between the current federal government and the unions. Lisa, how does it affect a union like yours?
The hostility of a coalition government?
At the Royal Commission.
Oh, Royal Commission. I think the Royal Commission will be very bored at the ANMF Victorian branch.
Right. Well, maybe the ACTU should be just throwing all the nurses' stuff at them.
I read with great interest John Sylvester's article 2 Saturdays ago in relation to the Royal Commission and the value of the Royal Commission, and about the powers that we already have with the Australian Crime Commission, the millions of dollars. Personally, I think I'm very concerned and almost frightened to turn on the radio to hear of yet another industry going down in Victoria, and I find it an extraordinary slap in the face to working people that the money that is being prepared to be spent on the Royal Commission, when money isn't prepared to support people with livelihoods, I find that for something to be so ideologically driven, for some headlines, we've already, the courts have dealt with and do deal with people like what Craig Thompson has done. We've got the new Registered Organisations Act introduced by the previous government, which has extraordinary onerous requirements for unions only, not the same sort of requirements for private companies, for example, which haven't been, they are amazing in relation to what the transparency and what unions have to do. So I can't speak for other unions, and I don't pretend to. I can speak for my own branch, and I know that we are absolutely squeaky clean. And, we spend a very large amount of time and effort and money in making sure that we comply with the regulations that exist with us already. We're very mindful of what's happened in the media and other unions, and we've had issues in our own past around making sure that members' dues were spent correctly, and we've always been very conscious of making sure that happens. So I think it's a political stunt, and I don't see the huge benefit of it. I see that there are already independent bodies that can deal with the issues already. We've got an active police force that maybe they need additional resourcing. I'm sure my colleague Greg Davies would say that here in Victoria, but I think it's very disappointing given the current climate in relation to what people really want from a government, and it won't achieve a lot, I don't think.
Whether or not you think it's a stunt, though, and obviously opinion is divided on that, there is an image problem for unions, I would have thought. And in fact, so many ALP members, in fact, think that the Royal Commission is a good idea. I wonder how much of that is Craig Thompson and how much of that is a sense that that unions are not changing, that they're stuck in this is perception I'm talking about, in a bit like political parties where people are off the political culture of this country. They're just off it, the language, the way politicians engage with the public. I get a sense that the unions have got a similar kind of problem. Do you think that that's true?
Yes, I do think that's true, but I don't think we as a union movement should give up in actually trying to tell our story of what we do. Much of what motivates me in my job is not about the size or the success of our membership numbers, but what motivates me and gets me out of bed in the morning, in part, is about making sure that we've got a great public health system here in Victoria that people can access. I don't feel as a registered nurse that's left the bedside, that has come into the union movement, that I've left my patients at all, because I feel when I'm doing my job, I'm advocating for nurses who are advocating for patients. There are wonderful things that the trade union movement does, the social justice side of things, the things that we sponsor. Take the CFMEU as an example. The wonderful work that they do in India in relation to providing education for totally impoverished children and building as a charity. There's a lot of wonderful work, but that message doesn't get out. Having said that, you could put out 25 media releases and people aren't interested in good news in this country. It's very difficult to get a good news story up in any media form, and it's very difficult to get, I think, a story that's actually got context. And
it's also, though, very difficult to get a real conversation going about it. And as somebody that I happened to be filling in for John Fain when Holden was going down, the whole week and every single day I was interviewing union representatives, and every single day until the day it closed, there was a real lack of engagement, and from the politicians as well. It was absolutely extraordinary. I mean, our manufacturing minister in Victoria didn't have a B plan. The day before Holden announced it was shutting, he said, we don't have a B plan, it's not going to shut. And there was a similar lack of depth, I would say, in many of the interviews that I did with various union representatives as well. To me, that's not about how terrific it is that, you know, a union's doing great work with education in villages in India, as much as I think that's great. That's about not being able to tell a story. It's about, I don't think people are against good news in this country, but I think they're into storytelling and being able to communicate, and that isn't happening. And I would say unions have a lot of really great stories to tell. And they've got a lot of really usable, terrifying ones as well, if that's what people want. It's why the 2007 campaign worked in the lead up to the election of Kevin Rudd for the Work Choices campaign. But that ability to tell a story, to have a narrative, I just don't know where it is at the moment that the movement as a whole is in absolute crisis.
And I think sometimes, Sally, that there's very little opportunity to tell a story because, you know, if I'm interviewed by a journalist, when I look at what I've actually said as opposed to what's printed in the paper the next day, it's like, I'm so glad I spent 20 minutes talking to them. Look at that one grab. So, and you do have to do things in grabs. People, the journalists, the print media are looking for a grab. They're not looking for giving you the capacity. And you have limited time on radio because there's pressure of wanting a whole lot of information and a whole lot of stories in one particular program. Whether we could do with some, you know, we don't tend to engage PR companies to tell our stories and help us tell our stories.
That's not going to help, surely. John, what do you think about, I mean, what you identified in the study that's being released, and about what could they be doing? What could unions be doing?
Actually, could I ask Lisa? I might just ask Lisa a question. Well, actually, I've got two questions. One is there do some union leaders find it difficult to switch from their kind of industrial approach that, you know, they need to be combative and put, you know, the employers or the employer associations under pressure, to a more kind of a, you know, public relations presentation in this sort of context? The second question is, the observation's been made that Australian industrial relations has always been very conflict-based, and then in Europe, you know, you have this much more social partnership, cooperative kind of approach to industrial relations where unions and employers try to work together. Do you think that's an issue, that unions here have found it difficult to switch from conflict to cooperation, or is that just a pipe dream of academics like me that it could even be achievable?
Perhaps at the end of the day, your first question, the answer to that, I think, if you know, I can only speak on behalf of myself, but I try to be myself. I'm actually not a really strong conflict person all the time. I don't screech across the table at employers. I don't see that necessarily gets you anywhere. We don't storm out and do those sorts of things. So I think it depends the person that you are and also the membership that you represent. You know, if I started saying the F word on the radio, for example, you know, my members would write to me and some of them would resign. Some of them wouldn't be happy about that at all.
I think some of those radio listeners might too.
That's right. Well, I guess radio's a bad example because you get the opportunity to block it out, don't you? But I do think you have to be yourself, and you know, I am a nurse who is the secretary of the Nurses and Midwives Union. I think into your second issue, I think, you know, for me, we try and start off collaboratively and try and work through things, but, you know, sometimes you get undermined so much by employers and governments, you just get so disillusioned and so disheartened by them because, you know, you secure an election commitment like we did. You know, we're going to retain nurse-patient ratios, qualified staff in their current state. And we spent 9 months, $4.2 million, trying to keep qualified nursing staff and keep the government to its commitment. So there, you know, there's a good reason for not trusting and being adversarial, and and that's because I feel the longer you're in the job, you can just get let down more and more and more. And if you find an employer, one that you can trust, who you think does do the right thing, we work very well with those. We're not in conflict all of the time.
The relationship between the affiliated unions with the ALP seems to be, it's obviously an ongoing issue, particularly for the Labor Party at the moment, I think. Where do you both stand on that?
Look, I'm a bit torn. I spent quite a bit of time in the US, and there's in the US the labour movement, the unions are not formally part of the Democratic Party, and that in a way that reduces them to another lobby group, another lobby group competing for the attention of the Democratic Party. So it's much more difficult for them to drive policy, to have influence over policy, and things like that. Whereas, in Australia, with the labour movement part of the Labor Party, in fact, instrumental in forming it, on the positive side, the labour movement has been able to have much more input into policy over time, and without being reduced to that lobbying role.
So, in fact, it's quite the opposite. They have an unbelievably undemocratic amount of power.
Well, that's right. So then,
the Labor Party.
So you've got this dilemma if you reduce their, so it has, I guess, got to a stage where it's so much more of a numbers game. I mean, the Labor Party conferences are no longer about policy discussion. They're about, everyone using their numbers to really just confirm already kind of agreed policy positions, which seem to have been driven by polling and that sort of thing. So, I guess if unions are going to continue to maintain their level of representation in the ALP, I think they need to look back to their policy their policy development role, and how in future they can actually be a much more positive force for social policy development, and not just providing numbers to lock in pre-existing agreed positions.
Is it remotely reasonable, Lisa, that they should have so much power given the diminishing proportion of people in unions?
Well, we're not affiliated.
No.
Haven't been and wouldn't affiliate. But I think the power base for, a significant contribution of the power base for the ALP should be the union movement, because it is meant to be about representing the interests of working class people. Just like there is a significant power base for the Liberal Party. It's not working class people, but they have their own power base. They have their own people who donate funds, who determine direction and policy. As with the National Party, they have their own interest and representing their own group. So I don't see that as an issue. I think it's across the board, and that's how it is.
Do you think that Australian people, though, are going to keep accepting that it's okay and it's just the way it is? Because my sense is that the feeling against unions at the moment, that this is a very big part of the problem. That why should people accept it who aren't in a union? That with, say, 11% I think affiliated union membership, but having the voting power that they do at the annual conference, why should we say that's okay just based on history?
But I think there's also a disconnect sometimes between the ALP conference and what actually ALP governments do. So I don't think we should get too excited that because something gets voted up at conference and it actually becomes policy, that it gets implemented. And I think there's a number of examples of that. But see, I what frustrates me is, the focus of the union influence on the Labor Party. And you could talk to union secretaries and they would be frustrated about the lack of influence that they have in relation to getting things up within the Labor Party.
Things that just aren't their own self-promotion into safe
right.
seats. Because, again, it's a perception is what I'm obviously putting to you, and one that you'd be well aware of.
Yep. Look at, I think of the textile clothing workers, Michelle O'Neill, my counterpart here in Victoria, the extraordinary work that went on in relation to, developing and getting that outworker legislation. Now, she got there in the end, but she didn't get there without not having a fight and putting a lot of pressure on the Labor government. The same could be said of a range of things, let alone the gay marriage issue.
If you'd like to ask a question, we've got plenty of time. You just need to put your hand up and somebody will put a microphone in it.
Yeah, I'm sort of wondering, rather than having a royal commission on union corruption, perhaps the unions should push for, and this is going to sound a bit utopian, but I'm trying to push the envelope here, a royal commission on corporate corruption. And I might start with the mining industry, and particularly the coal mining industry, because between 1984 and 2011, Australia was the leading exporter of coal in the world. Indonesia has moved into number one. But in many ways, we are outsourcing more emissions than we are generating.
We're possibly getting a bit off topic, so ask a question or I'll take it as a comment.
So I'm just wondering if maybe the unions should take a different tact on this. I know it's a very different tact, but I just wonder what the panelists think on that.
I'll start by saying I'm quite confident that the trade union movement would have no absolute any success in lobbying the government to not proceed with the Royal Commission. So it'd be nice, but it's futile. I do think there's obviously, we've got in our own country insurance. I think John Sylvester raised the issue of Visey in that article. We've got lots of examples of concerns around corporate issues that we can raise as part of our response to it. But I think, the Royal Commission's going to happen. We just need to make sure that our house is in order. And our house should be in order. We are dealing with members' money, so I have got our house should be in order.
I'd like to see a lot more. I'd like to see a lot more transparency around industry subsidies. So I don't think subsidies to businesses like Ford, Holden, SPC Ardmona, Cadbury in Tasmania are necessarily a bad thing. But perhaps there could be more focus on what conditions are attached to these subsidies. Shouldn't the subsidies be helping to create good jobs, rather than apparently that being a bad thing, unless it's in Tasmania. So I'd like to see a bit more focus on what corporations are delivering for subsidy in terms of quality of jobs, levels of training, and skills development, rather than a rather two-dimensional sort of seemingly ideological debate about subsidies and jobs.
And I think one of the things, like for example the BMW car industry, I heard people talking about the levels of subsidy and the investment. Actually, I think it was Steve Bracks that I heard on the ABC last Tuesday evening, and listening to him talk and the knowledge that he had and the rationale as to why we should have been in there fighting for Toyota, because if you're in Abu Dhabi, you get into an Altona Camry as a taxi overseas, it's just, I really get so disappointed that it's so shallow, the information that we get, and it's so limited, and I just find it really disappointing when you've got people out there who know, and he did get to tell that great story, and hopefully a lot of people were listening to it.
I think what amazes me about this debate is the kind of rather dreamy-like atmosphere about it, in a sense that I think there is no question that neoliberalism, not just in Australia but worldwide, is waging a ruthless war against working people. And its aim is basically to destroy unionism and atomize the working class. Now, corporate unionism, it just amazes me that I think John, I'm not sure of your second name, talks about corporate cooperation. The ruling classes are certainly not into cooperation. They're into basically destruction of working conditions and reducing wages and conditions to a very minimal level. Now, my former father-in-law, who is dead now, led a big strike of teachers in the 60s, and they won. What amazes me about the current union movement is that there is no militancy. There is no, for instance, strikes, big strikes, general strikes, which do not negotiate with the employers. And, my question here is, do you think that you are basically dealing with reasonable people? Because you're not.
Okay.
They are like wolves.
Thank you. Who'd like to go first?
Well, I'll speak on behalf of our members, and I don't support that our members aren't militant. Our members, in their enterprise agreement, walked out of hospitals across the state in 18 facilities, were the subject of federal court proceedings, and so I actually don't support that. But I also think that you can't just think that a strike's going to fix everything. When I think of the strategy behind our enterprise agreement and the outcomes that we want, sometimes it's the penultimate is not going on strike, always. So I think there's more things that we need to be doing, and I don't share that view that that's the only thing that we can judge our activism and our commitment to standing up for whatever our cause is.
John, does that fit with your sense of changing practices? That strikes are not used in the way that they used to be, and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly statistics show that the extent of industrial action annually has been falling. Back in the 70s, you had a lot more what they call wildcat strikes. Perhaps someone at the workplace was dismissed and everyone would go out. And now I think strike action is much more strategic and targeted. In a way it has to be, because in the old days all industrial action was technically prohibited but no one ever enforced it. So you had much more freedom to use industrial action as a tool. These days the legal system tightly circumscribes what industrial action is permissible, and it's only in the context of enterprise bargaining. And yes, I mean it might be an ideal for everyone to be a lot more militant, but the enforcement system is now much more active, and you risk criminal liability and so on, and penalties for engaging in that. So I think for various reasons unions have become a lot more strategic about how they use their militancy, but I think there still is plenty of militancy around.
Up the front and then down the back there. Next one. Right down the back.
The problem in the construction industry is that only 10% of first homeowners can get into their homes. The biggest problem from that is negative gearing by the federal government. The next problem is in terms of the construction companies who actually make sure that they add any contingencies to make sure that they make a profit. And then there's the workers on the bottom. If we're going to do a Royal Commission, you start by addressing what the problem is, and the problem is actually I guess wildcat unionists are only a small part of the problem. You've got to look at the whole problem.
If you're going to have a Royal Commission, aren't you meant to start with knowing exactly what the findings will be?
It'd be interesting, I think, to see the retired High Court judge, you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, or in charge, with the terms of reference being so broad. I think it'll be there's more to happen yet. So I think more to play out.
In that sense too, it's true that business and other interests may well be caught up in this as well.
Yes.
Mm.
Look, my lament, and we haven't discussed this so far, the lament at the membership level of trade unions in Australia has gone from 65% when I first came here in 1964 to 19% is the same lament as what the Labour Party has suffered in terms of membership decline. We all know that there is a very strong need for transparency, a reconstructed democracy. This also goes true for part of the trade union movement. But why is it then, and I'd like some comment on this, why is it so that because our wages, relatively speaking, I'm not talking about social conditions, but wages are relatively strong compared to many comparable Western democracies. Places like Finland, the trade union membership is 87%, 94% of all teachers belong to unions. Here, we've gone down so far that there is a huge challenge ahead, in the trade union movement, to get people to actually belong voluntarily to the union. And so, have you any comment to make on what ought to be done, to really get that happening, because that's very necessary.
Well, I think an interesting statistic is that union membership may have dropped to 19% of the workforce, but I think about 60% of the workforce actually benefit from minimum employment standards which unions have been involved in setting. So we've got about 40% of people covered by enterprise agreements and about 20% of another 20% who are award reliant, so people who rely on minimum standards set by awards. So that's, that's a pretty significant figure, proportion of people who benefit from what unions do, but who aren't formally part of the union movement. And I guess a challenge for unions is how to try and get to those people, some of whom are referred to as free riders, but and the government's blocked sort of any attempts to try and formally bring them into the system. But I'd be interested in what Lisa has to say about possible strategies for tapping into those people who do benefit directly from what unions do.
Well, it's about trying to, I guess, first of all, maybe our capacity to actually get into contact with people might not be geographically, we're a bit disadvantaged over Finland, I suspect. But I do agree, we have to continually try and look for ways to making ourselves relevant, not just to a particular generation, but, for us, we've got to be mindful about a generation of nurses and midwives that are coming forward. At the moment, we consider you young in our union stats if you're less than 35, which is probably people at 35 might not see themselves. So we've got to, being so young, so we have to make sure that what we're doing is encouraging the 20s, the 21s, the 22-year-olds as well, so that we're growing that base. We don't want an exodus of mature nurses and then there goes our membership. So we do, I agree, have to continually strive for making sure that our message about our relevance and what we do for our own industry groups or our own who we represent, that we're continually getting that message across. I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine today, and he reminded me that we would in Australia consider ourselves a predominantly Christian country, yet there are more people that are members of the trade union that attend a Christian church regularly. So perhaps he said we should call ourselves a union country rather than a Christian country, because there's more in the union movement. And so, as someone who battles every day to try and think of ways about how we can get more people in to the union movement, I also look, and yes, we have a positive story to tell, and we share that story with other unions, but we're not doom and gloom. We're not the end of the world. We're not going away, and we are all continually striving to make sure that we're growing our base, that we're retaining our members. So I'm not as doom and gloom about things. I do think there's always a role for us, and we just keep striving for that.
And you're not just praying for success.
No, I'm not. No, praying for success won't get me there. Absolutely not.
Is it an issue that also that the union movement? It's having a tough time at the moment, but obviously its success in Australia over Australian modern history has been. There have been tremendous achievements, coupled with 20 years of uninterrupted economic growth, where you've got these young people, as you say, who have grown up their whole working lives in economic prosperity, good employment, minimum wages and conditions have been a given, that a lot of the work has seen to have been done. Is that an issue?
No, because, I think what we should think about, we've talked about the Your Rights at Work campaign, Sally, being so successful. Who is the union movement? I'm not the union movement. Craig Thompson's not the union movement. John Setka's not the union movement. The union movement is mums and dads, of not all mums and dads, but, men and women from all walks of life who not so long ago, that's only 6 years ago, came together in the Your Rights at Work campaign and was absolutely fundamental to getting rid of the Howard government. So I think, strength isn't just in numbers. It's also about action and activity. And, I think people shouldn't underwrite the union movement because they think, the numbers are declining. They should remember who the union movement is made up of, and it's people who vote.
One more really quick question.
I think image and perceptions aside, the reality is that the nature of work in Australia is changing, and the rise of casual employment and unpaid employment or other insecure employment is a huge challenge for recruiting members, but also presenting solutions for those workers through the union movement. How do you think and can the union movement address those challenges and recruit members for employees who are in secure work?
I haven't got any quick fix around it. I would add to the list also around things like working from home is a critical issue. Going knocking on people's doors and trying to get people to join. So we do have to be innovative in relation to getting our message out about that there is a union that can do something for you and articulate that succinctly about what it is that we can do. I haven't really, in relation to a casual workforce, that's not the biggest issue in health for us, because it tends to be not economically viable to have a casual workforce. So we're fortunately a little bit better, but something we have to keep our minds on, because we have gone through periods where nurses' jobs have gone and casual staff have come in, but then ultimately the employers recognise that that's too expensive and not a good solution for the patients. So I think there's a whole body of work that we luckily I don't have to spend too much of my time thinking about, but it's a very big issue for the movement as a general issue to deal with: casualisation, retaining entitlements, compliance issues, and just being able to find people is critical.
I think those unions that do face those issues most strongly have to continue, as they have been, fighting for legal mechanisms to allow, for example, for casuals to be converted to more secure employment positions after periods of time, so that you don't have casuals just being rolled over and over again. So unions fighting for those sorts of changes, which hopefully will, increase membership from those sorts of areas. I think also, just going back to the enforcement issue, the extent to which unions can represent those sorts of workers in not being exploited in those positions and trying to get that message out, again, might kind of attract more members and then in itself lead to further change. But look, it is certainly those sorts of changes, trying to, I guess, fight for allowing some flexibility, because there's no doubt in certain industries employers need some flexibility in working arrangements, but doing it without insecurity. And there's plenty of research around into how you can achieve flexibility in work arrangements, quality part-time work, for example, that doesn't also come with the insecurity. So unions trying to promote those sorts of mechanisms will hopefully, if successful, help them attract those members.
We are out of time. It's been really, really interesting having you both here this evening. I mean, Lisa, you brought up before the little snippets, little grabs of time you get here and there to see you with John in one place for a whole hour in person is what the Fifth Estate is for, and we're really grateful to both of you for coming along. Please thank John Howe and Lisa Fitzpatrick.